There's a part of my game I've been dreading fixing pretty much since its inception. In fact, between the content I've been adding lately, I've made several attempts to fix this one godforsaken issue, and I haven't been able to do it easily. Every time I get one aspect down, it broke another, or otherwise made something else I knew I would eventually need impossible. I don't always have a lot of time to work on this game, and the solution I needed took more than a few hours after my work shift to figure out. So every so often, after adding a feature, I would take another crack at this thing, feel like I was wasting my time when I couldn't solve it in a couple hours, and then put it on the back burner while I implemented something else. This cycle has been repeating endlessly since I started regularly making YouTube content. This is an indie game development crab swirl. You see, making games is easy, except when it's not, and the solution I'd imagined required forbidden knowledge I didn't have access to. So, with the holidays affording me some free time, I rolled up my sleeves and actually learned how shaders work. Let's take a look at the many symptoms of this development thorn that's been in my side. You might have noticed how boring and flat everything looks, and while I have no problem with that in real life, shout out to my A-Cup Angels, in the context of a video game, it is absolutely hideous. This is because the game has no shadows, since the shader I ham-fisted in initially to support a feature I later scrapped didn't have shading since it was meant for two-dimensional sprites. But simply applying a shader with support for shadows caused my entire setup to be ruined due to the somewhat novel approach I have of assembling characters. I do this by generating individual sprite sheets for each limb and then Frankensteining them back together to create an entire character. This way you can have fun stuff like this happen. My naive approach had 8 different sprites layered on top of each other, changing the sorting order of the limbs based on the direction the character was facing. That was all well and good for the prototype, but as I alluded to earlier, the shadows didn't play nice with the sorting order, and the result was all the limbs becoming stacked on top of each other. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. At certain distances from the camera, lines would appear separating the sprites, breaking the finely crafted illusion I'd created. This is because the 8 different layers can't force pixel precision within the context of each other. This probably would have worked fine with a 2D game, but with 2D sprites in a 3D world, certain camera angles and distances would always cause these tears. And because of the way Unity handles sprites, the sorting order was consistent across multiple characters, so 2 nearby characters might have their limbs overlap another character physically behind them like they're doing here. Which, to be certain, doesn't often happen in real life. This all had the downstream effect of me not wanting to invest time in the existing system since I knew I'd have to replace it, which is why this disgusting effect caused by limbs changing position during an animation has persisted the entire time. Let's see it again in slow motion. Here, gaping wounds open at the seams of the character's arms. The torso, which includes the bloody stumps underneath it, made sense being on top initially, but as the character moves, that was no longer the case. The cascade of reasoning continues though, since I knew a solution to the gaping wound problem would require regenerating my sprites. I was avoiding adding content that required sprites like new enemies and equipment, since it would have to be redone when I figured this issue out. Solo indie game development had me in a mental gridlock that I coped with by adding other features I could hammer out without feeling like I was working inefficiently. Anyways, the solution I always intended to get to was to use a single shader that handled the sprite sheet for each limb, sorted them appropriately, and drew the sprites as a single image on a 3D quad. That sounds like a bunch of junk to you, just hold on for one more damn second and we'll take a look at the result. Now, revel in the beauty of my lit characters. Not only can they now receive lighting, preventing them from looking flat, but they also cast shadows. Compare this to before and you can really see how much more they pop. Also notice the tearing and sort order issues are gone when the character picks things up. And just to prove I'm an honest man and not desperately trying to hide this issue, let's chuck this sword at the wall in slow motion. Damn, you have no idea how good that feels. Check out this scene of a stress test before and after. The new animation system that involves changing properties of the materials instead of manually applying up to 8 different sprites isn't causing any frame rate issues, and all these characters no longer have their arms appearing on top of someone in front of them, all while receiving shadows that make them feel a lot more like part of the world. I can get rid of the stupid transparent circles I stuck at the bottom of them as well. There's still a few strange pixels caused by some rounding I'm doing with my shader to attempt a pixel-perfect effect, which will take some tweaking. But beyond that, the only thing making my characters ugly now is my own artwork, instead of a ton of graphical glitches. Finally, the real game development journey begins. All that's left to do is suddenly have 100 new f***ing problems like these god shadows flickering. F*** me.